Story. Images that are bound to raise hackles in Beijing. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken meeting officials of the Tibetan government in exile during a visit to the national capital. Blinken met two Tibetan officials considered extremely close to the Tibetan spiritual leader, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. That meeting took place in New Delhi is intended to send out a strong message to Beijing from two of the oldest and the largest democracies of the world.
Images that will raise heckles in Beijing. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken meeting Tibetan spiritual leader His Holiness the Dalai Lama's representatives Ngogduk Dongchung and Tibetan Buddhist monk Geshe Dorji Damdul, current director of Tibet House in Delhi. Antony Blinken's move is seen as a strong signal to Beijing on the firm stand by USA on Tibet.
People of Tibet are given complete freedom in selecting the next Dalai Lama, and this will not be interfered by the Chinese government.
Tuesday's meeting with Tibetan leaders comes at the back of the Prime Minister Modi's greetings to Dalai Lama on his 86th birthday, the first public acknowledgement of Dalai Lama since 2015. Last week, Xi Jinping visited Yangtze, a border town close to Arunachal Pradesh, during his visit to Tibet. Xi's visit was slammed globally after the Chinese government released visuals of crowds cheering for the Chinese premier as he landed in Tibet. A video showed people in ethnic Chinese dress waving the Chinese flag during his survey. Xi Jinping also visited the Potala Palace, the traditional home of exiled Tibetan spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama. But the US pressure on China is growing. Early in July, US Congressman Scotty Perry introduced a resolution in the Congress calling on US President Joe Biden to declare Tibet an independent country. In his meeting with the civil society, Blinken said a vibrant civil society is required for making democracies more open, more inclusive, more resilient, and more equitable. He called for connections with the civil society members to be stronger to make the democracy stronger. At a joint briefing with External Affairs Minister, Blinken deftly dismissed China's criticism on the growing indo-US ties in the Pacific and the Quad, a view that was seconded by Jaishankar.
What the Quad is not is a military alliance. It is not that. Its purpose is, again, just to advance cooperation on regional challenges while reinforcing international rules and values that we believe together underpin peace, prosperity, and stability in the region.
People need to get over the idea that somehow other countries doing things is directed against them. I think countries do things what are in their interest for their good and for the good of the world, and that is exactly what is the case with the Quad.
Blinken's engaging the Tibetans in Delhi is the most significant contact after Barack Obama's meeting with the Dalai Lama in 2016. With Geeta Mohan in New Delhi, Bureau Report, India Today.
So what is the messaging here? Joining me on India First, amongst the finest voices on matters military and India-China, Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma is former Ladakh Corps Commander. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash has been India's Consul General in Shanghai. He's a seasoned diplomat. Professor Brahma Chilani is a strategic thinker, commentator who keeps a hawk eye on China. And if I may, Professor Chilani, what is the message that India and the United States are sending to China with these images, especially after Xi Jinping's visit to Ningxi just a couple of weeks ago?
I think the Indians and the Americans are signaling their intent to raise the profile of the Tibet issue. The Tibet issue has long been neglected even by India. Even as China has been playing the Kashmir card, playing the Arunachal Pradesh card against India, India has been hesitant to raise the profile of the Tibet issue. But recently, when Modi publicly greeted the Dalai Lama on his birthday, that suggested that there might be a subtle change in Indian policy. And I think President Xi Jinping's secrecy-shrouded Tibet visit, which began with the India border, that provocative action of Xi Jinping has come as a wake-up call for everyone in New Delhi. And certainly the Americans too now know that China is increasingly pursuing aggressive policies. In fact, when President Biden sent his Deputy Secretary of State recently,
Yes.
in fact, on Monday, she was in Tianjin meeting with the Chinese Foreign Minister and the Vice Foreign Minister. The Chinese side delivered another tongue lashing. This was a repeat of what happened in Anchorage. So the Biden administration knows that Xi Jinping's regime is increasingly belligerent, and the US needs to act in a way to rein in China.
The US and India, the fact that Xi Jinping visited a place barely 20 kilometers from the border in Arunachal Pradesh, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, is there a hardening of India's stance, especially when you look at these images that the US Secretary of State meets Tibetan leaders in New Delhi? Also, Prime Minister Narendra Modi greeting His Holiness the Dalai Lama on his birthday, and His Holiness saying that perhaps there would be a meeting post-COVID. What does this indicate, Ambassador?
Greetings, Gaurav. For me, it does not indicate very much. What Secretary Blinken has done today is merely a pinprick and nothing more, nothing less. 5 years ago, Obama had met His Holiness,
Yes.
the Dalai Lama. What happened after 5 years? 1951, China walked into Tibet. Today, the process of Sinicization is happening. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese tourists are flooding into Tibet. Their communication and transportation links are strong. I think it is a message that that US is sending to China to say that, look, we can play the Tibetan card, but it will all hinge on the US relations with China. And if the relations are strong, it is forgotten. If there is a relations take a dip, then the Tibetan issue is raised. But I don't think that any comfort can be drawn from that, because one swallow does not make it a summer. And I don't think that the fact that he met in Delhi also means anything, because we could not have told the Secretary Blinken to meet with the representative of His Holiness. So I will not draw any major conclusions from that. I think it's business as usual, nothing more, nothing less.
General Sharma, the commanders of India and China are expected to meet on or around the 31st of July to take forward discussions on disengagement at Gogra, Hot Spring, Depsang and other friction points. Now, is India trying to send out a message before that meeting, or will that meeting take place? And do you expect any forward movement, especially when there are reports coming in that China is really strengthening its defenses, not just in Tibet, but also in Xinjiang?
Thank you, Gaurav, for inviting. The fact of the matter is that there is a dramatic shift into not the defenses, I would say, but in the air infrastructure all along Tibet and Xinjiang, in all the airfields and all the areas. And China still retains the two divisions that it had in Rodok in the areas of Xinjiang. So what I would say is that there is a kind of permanence brought into the forces that have been brought into the Tibetan plateau, and in proximity to the line of actual control. And this, like rightly pointed out by Professor Chelani, the visit of Xi Jinping towards Jiangxi was indeed a provocative act. Now, the meeting that is scheduled to take place later this month, I will not personally put too much of hope into it, because if it is downscaled to Major General and the Chinese send a senior colonel, which is their equivalent of kind of brigadier, well, they will not be entitled to have much discussions on this issue, because it's been discussed at the optimal level, and the Chinese seems to be very contented with whatever they have and whatever kind of buffers or disengagement zones that they have created all over in the Xinjiang area, and with no clashes likely to take place. I think they are in a fine position. So I don't think it is.
And yet they continue to strengthen their defenses. Yet they continue to strengthen their defenses all along. Professor Chelani, what is US Secretary of State Antony Blinken's visit to India's key takeaway when it comes to India-China standoff? Is there something tangible for India in this?
I was hoping that Secretary Blinken would clearly denounce the Chinese aggression against India on Indian soil. When Trump was in office, his Secretary of State, Defense Secretary, National Security Advisor, all the top officials of the US government, one after another, denounced China's aggression against India. They openly backed India. But since Biden took office, I've yet to hear one senior Biden administration official criticize China's aggression and openly support India. I think it's very important for the US government to back India.
Yes.
If you're going to make the Quad a forum that has some concrete strategic agenda, the US has to do its part, which is that building the Quad will only be meaningful if the Americans are willing to back their partner that is facing a major Chinese aggression. The Himalayas have become Asia's biggest flashpoint.
Yes, and is that tension only likely to increase?
When the U.S. Deputy Secretary was in Tianjin, China 2 days ago,
yes,
and she listed Chinese aggressive actions in the East China Sea, South China Sea, Hong Kong, but she did not mention Himalayas. And I think this omission needs to be corrected.
Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, Xi Jinping visiting Tibet, China increasing its military presence both in Xinjiang and in Tibet. Was Xi Jinping's visit a major provocation? Are we somehow trying to counter that, whether it's militarily or diplomatically? Because both India and America today said that Quad is not a military alliance. But what role does Quad play in India's defense against China's belligerence?
Well, we keep on underplaying the role of Quad, whereas it is very clear that Quad has been established as a reaction of these 4 democratic countries to Chinese aggression. I think we need to be clear about that fact. And it's also true that the American position or Biden administration's position outlook on China is evolving. Wendy Sherman, when she was in Tianjin 2 days ago, she said that US welcomes stiff competition but does not seek conflict. And even Biden in his statements has said that whenever it is in the interest of the US, they will be open to dealing with China. I mean, you deal with a country when it is in your national interest. So I don't think that we have heard the last word. US seems to be under Biden administration, seems to be seeking some kind of an understanding, opening with China. Although Austin Lloyd, who is in Singapore, he has said quite clearly that China is engaged in aggression. But I don't think that we have heard the last word. And things are evolving, there are pieces moving, and we'll have to wait and watch how the cookie crumbles.
Okay, because General Sharma, the way China is building up, and it's building up almost all across, right from Arunachal Pradesh through to Ladakh, are we looking at, even if it's a limited skirmish, are we looking at a skirmish before winter this year, either in Ladakh or Sikkim or Arunachal Pradesh? Or in your appreciation, has China realized post Galwan and post India's QPQ that China does not have the advantage it thought it did, and India does have a strong resolve like we saw in the QPQ operations?
Yeah, thank you. The fact of the matter is that I don't think we need to overplay the issue of conventional war in the course of this year. We know the quantum of force that the Chinese have brought across, especially in the areas opposite eastern Ladakh, in Rudok and in Aksai Chin. About 2 odd divisions. They do not mean the kind of business that is implied by a serious conventional war. There is no movement across the other side of Sangpo, Yarlung Sangpo, that is Brahmaputra in Tibet towards the border. So one does not presume. Of course, it can be carried out, but one doesn't presume that there is an actuality into carrying out conventional war or conventional operations across the front. However, as you rightly pointed out, possibility of a skirmish or a surreptitious movement of occupation of some unheld areas or underheld areas or those kind of movements across in Uttarakhand Tibet border or Himachal Tibet border or in the areas of Arunachal Pradesh. That possibility exists, and we have to guard against that.
Okay, because Professor Brahmachalani, given the way China did not take forward the disengagement process beyond the north and south bank of Pengong Tso to Gogra, Hot Spring, and let alone Depsang, how do you see the talks move forward at all? Or is China giving out that impression? Fine, we outmaneuvered them in south of Pengong Tso. That is why they moved back from there. There is no moving back any other way. What next then?
I think the Pangong area was a red herring. China's intent was to divert India's attention by turning the Pangong area into a hotspot.
Why they focused on Depsang?
Largely their objectives. And they're using these talks to buy time. They have used the talks to consolidate their land grabs. They are frenetically building new military facilities along the Himalayan frontier. And they're seeking to present India new territorial and military fait accompli. And I think it's clear that India will not buckle under Chinese military pressure. A lot of people talk about China-India power asymmetry. That power asymmetry is a reality. But as you know, aggregate military and economic capabilities alone do not determine any war's outcome. History is replete with examples of the weaker side defeating the stronger opponent. India has the world's most experienced army in hybrid mountain warfare. And I think it's India's battle-hardened air and ground forces that provide India the confidence that it can counter China's aggression. I think India's main weakness is a risk-averse political and military leadership. That's our main weakness.
But when push comes to shove, they do take a risk like they did in the QPQ operations. But also the fact that India has advantage of geography in Ladakh. But the other big picture today, Chinese Foreign Minister and State Councillor Wang Yi meeting 9 members of the Taliban led by Mullah Biradar in the northern city of Tianjin in China. Now, Taliban wants China's help for development in Afghanistan. And Wang Yi has asked Mullah Biradar to ensure that Afghan territory is not used for terror in what many call is East Turkestan or Xinjiang. In fact, Wang Yi asked Taliban to cut off ties with the East Turkestan Islamic movement. Take a look at this report. Chinese Foreign Minister and State Councillor Wang Yi met Mullah Biradar and a 9-member Taliban delegation in the northern Chinese city of Tianjin. Media reports indicate China has pledged support to the Taliban in Afghanistan. Wang Yi in turn asked the Taliban to cut off ties with the Uyghur freedom fighters or the East Turkestan Islamic movement. The meeting assumes significance as Taliban are seen to be making deeper inroads into Afghanistan after the US withdrawal. In New Delhi, India and the United States discussed the situation in Afghanistan. External Affairs Minister Dr. S Jaishankar and the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken discussed efforts to ensure Afghanistan-led and owned peace process. Blinken said Afghanistan would become a pariah state in case Taliban took control by force.
Ultimately, an Afghanistan that does not respect the rights of its people, an Afghanistan that commits atrocities against its own people, would become a pariah state. The taking over the country by force and abusing the rights of its people is not the path to achieve those objectives.
The US also stressed that there was no military solution to the conflict in Afghanistan. Conflict resolution requires Taliban and the Afghanistan government to come to the table in a violence-free environment where future government has both inclusive and full representation.
It is essential that peace negotiations are taken seriously by all parties. The world wishes to see an independent, sovereign, democratic and stable Afghanistan at peace with itself and with its neighbors.
The US Secretary also held a detailed discussion with National Security Advisor Ajit Doval on emerging situation in Afghanistan and the Indo-Pacific. The visiting US Foreign Secretary also called on Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Both India and the United States emphasized Quad was not a military alliance formed with any country in mind, but an alliance of like-minded democracies. With Geeta Mohan in Delhi, Bureau Report, India Today. Professor Chelani, what do you make of these pictures of Wang Yi with Mullah Biradar and other Taliban leaders? Is China's interest restricted to mining, rare earths, metals, or are they looking at that Wakhan corridor road? Is this just a transactional relationship, or does China intend putting boots on ground?
A transactional approach has long been one of the hallmarks of Chinese foreign policy. Look at this paradox. China views Islamic extremism as a pressing threat. In fact, it has jailed more than 1 million Muslims in Xinjiang. Yet it has built cozy ties with the Taliban since the 1990s. When the Taliban was in power from 1996 onwards, China established the closest relationship with the regime there, the closest relationship of any non-Muslim country.
Yes.
And it launched flights between Urumqi and Kabul. Today, the Taliban wants China to assist it in two ways. It wants international recognition, which China can offer. It also wants much needed infrastructure and economic developmental assistance. China is willing to offer both to co-opt the Taliban and to cement the cozy relationship it has with the Taliban. It's very clear that the American exit has opened the path for China to make strategic inroads into Afghanistan and to deepen its penetration of Pakistan, Iran, and Central Asia. So I think the American exit is going to prove geopolitically a watershed development, one that increases space for Chinese expansionism and actually undercuts India's interests in the West. Because
who will protect China's interests in Afghanistan when China's interests, General Sharma, are not even safe in Pakistan? You've had 9 Chinese engineers who were killed in a terror attack, 2 more targeted just today. And China's soldiers haven't exonerated themselves with honor, whether it's in Galwan or in UN missions. So China clearly wouldn't want to put boots on ground in Afghanistan.
Yeah, see, despite everything else and despite him, Wang Yi meeting Baradar, China still recognizes the Ashraf Ghani government. And they already have projects out there in Afghanistan. They have the Abu Darya oil field and the Ainak copper mine and the road between Peshawar and Kabul being created, being built up. So there is already work. Chinese are doing it. Naturally, they want to protect their economic interests in this area. They also want to increase the access across to Iran, where they have major treaty across done last year. So the fact of the matter is that Chinese, of course, certainly don't want the boots on ground. And it suits them, despite being strange bedfellows, it suits them to have a bonhomie with Taliban so that they can have an access and they can protect their interests. And if so, in doing so, they provide legitimacy to a futuristic Taliban government, so be it. You know, Chinese pay carry all this via transactional method only.
But is this then, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, major disadvantage India? Are we then effectively out of the game in Afghanistan?
Well, we have very few cards to play, Gaurav. That is very true. But we are doing what is feasible. What is remarkable is Mr. Wang Yi's sheer opportunism, without any values, no ethics, and no morality. I mean, though morality does not sit on the board of directors when it comes to foreign policy,
Yes.
to say that the Taliban will play an important role in peace, reconciliation, and reconstruction. I mean, what are they talking of? Are they talking of peace of a graveyard? Reconstruction where it's not reconstruction but destruction. But there is one single point program as far as China is concerned, and that is the Xinjiang province. Now that the Taliban is close or applying pressure at Badakhshan, they are very concerned that that Taliban will start extending support to the East Turkmenistan Islamic movement. So that is all, I think that is the crux of the matter, that and Taliban today will give them whatever assurance they want. There is no doubt.
You know, that's the point I was coming to, Professor Chilani. Is East Turkestan or East Turkmenistan or Xinjiang actually China's Achilles heel? And can China afford this? On the one hand, there is Tibet. On the other, there is Xinjiang.
Not really. See, China only has a tiny little border with Afghanistan. That border is 76 kilometers wide only, and it is made up largely of impossible high altitude.
Yes.
It's impossible to cross that border. It has no connectivity. The only way militants can get to Xinjiang is through Tajikistan. But the Chinese have deployed thousands of PLA troops in Tajikistan, including on the Tajik-Afghan border.
Yes.
Just the way they have thousands of their own troops in Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir also borders Xinjiang, doesn't it?
Yes.
But despite Pakistan's descent into violent jihadism, China has managed over the years to insulate Pakistani turmoil from anything happening in Xinjiang. Similarly, because of China's secure borders, they will be able to secure their interests, secure Xinjiang, despite the worsening situation in Afghanistan. Their interests are mainly economic. They have made major investments in Pakistan, in Tajikistan, which is resource-rich, and they also want to protect their own workers, the Chinese workers working on projects in Tajikistan and Pakistan. That's their primary interest. They're using the issue of terrorism and the flow of militants as a cover to push their economic and strategic interests. Can you imagine China has thousands of its own troops in two countries that border Afghanistan, Tajikistan and Pakistan?
And when you look at these images that are coming out, fast-paced diplomatic and political developments that are taking place, and we'll be tracking that story very closely. As always, General Sharma, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash and Professor Brahma Chilani, many thanks for joining me here on India First. Coming up on the other side, some of these images are disturbing.